All right, I thought this could be an interesting off-season topic. And this is going to be kind of more of a general thoughts video, more of a bit of a loose format here. I'm going to try to just hit record and go. See if this is an interesting video, or maybe it sucks, but you know what? I try new things here. Today's topic, I'm going to be going over the quarterback rings argument, right? It's a classic argument that we always bring up, which is, Tom Brady has 7 Super Bowl rings. Peyton Manning only has 2. Therefore, no doubt about it, Tom Brady is better than Peyton Manning. End of discussion. Well, yes and no, right? I mean, there's several ways you could look at it. For one thing, you could say, hey, the reality is a quarterback just has a ton of value in the NFL. And having an elite quarterback, if your quarterback is really one of the best of all time, they're probably going to have several Super Bowl rings. Like, that's just typically how that's going to go. But there's obviously a lot more factors that go into it than just that. And I think that's kind of the argument that most people align on, which is like, listen, Super Bowl rings, yes, if you're an elite quarterback, you're going to win some Super Bowls, but there's so many other factors that go into it, what kind of team you're on, what kind of coaching you have, all of that stuff, which is, I think, totally fair to bring up. But here's where things get a little bit weird. The quarterback wins argument and the quarterback stat and the quarterback rings stat are very dependent on the team, but so is literally every other aspect of evaluating a player. I mean, passer rating is definitely, a team stat. And you could argue, I think some people would argue it's even more of a team stat because, there is just so much dependence on your personnel around you. And there's no denying that if a quarterback has a passer rating of 105, let's say, in a great situation versus a quarterback that has a passer rating of 100 in a awful situation, we'd probably all take the quarterback that had a passer rating of 100 over the guy who had a passer rating of 105, even though that's a pretty good stat. Like, that's a stat I like to look at. There's other stats you can do. There's ways you can try to get around the fact that football is such a team sport and is so dependent on players around you. PFF grades, I think, try to do that. They try to make sure that they only evaluate quarterbacks in terms of how good they genuinely are. How are they playing, regardless of the talent around them? Are they making the right play? The issue is it's still a flawed stat. We still have yet to perfect, the stat, even though it is, PFF, a lot of smart people working on it. One of the issues with a Pro Football Focus grade, I think, is it's kind of created more of a batting average than a slugging percentage when it comes to quarterbacks, which that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad stat, just it's not a perfect one, because a lot of times what the way the grading works, if you're unaware, is they, more or less in simple terms, they kind of give you a grade on each play where it can be up to +2 and as low as -2, and they kind of give you a grade on each specific play. And so the quarterbacks who consistently do the right thing and are very good game managers, like a Tua, like a Jimmy Garoppolo, they're going to perform maybe better than their actual value is. Again, I'm not saying Tua and Jimmy Garoppolo are the same caliber of player, just similar stylistic types of players. They're just going to perform better in that stat than maybe someone like a Patrick Mahomes, who PFF grades don't give as much credit to, but they still typically have him as their best quarterback, but maybe not as high as you would think. But he has some of those just incredible home runs type plays. If it's a batting average type stat, well, then someone who hits a lot of home runs is going to be undervalued due to that statistic. So how else do you do it? Well, I'm sure some people are arguing or shouting at their phone or computer or TV or whatever they're watching this on. Just watch the tape, right? Use the eye test, the good old-fashioned eye test. But that, too, is still incredibly flawed. The reality is that, using the good old-fashioned eye test, even if you're incredibly trained and you notice stuff very well, you're a person, and you're going to be subject to getting, fooled in certain ways. I mean, one great example of how I view this is how come every single, we all know this, where I won't use a specific team. We'll make up a team. Let's say that, there's a Joe Smith who is the quarterback of the Orlando Ostriches, right? Every single Orlando Ostriches fan is going to be higher on Joe Smith than the average person is. If Joe Smith's like the 10th best quarterback, they're going to say he's the 5th best quarterback. That's not because they're all stupid. It's because there's that subconscious bias that comes into effect. They genuinely believe he's that good. It's just because they're a fan, they let their, homerism come into play a little bit. Something I've done, something we all do to some degree. Now, if it's not a quarterback you care about, there still are other ways you can make stuff happen. Maybe if they're playing against your favorite team and happen to have a bad game that game, then you think that they're worse than they actually are. Maybe if they're the kind of player who makes a lot of splashy plays but doesn't do a lot of the little things, you still kind of start to notice the high-end plays just because when you're watching the game, you notice that more. Even if you're watching with a really trained eye, those little things can come into play. So watching tape is, I would say, the best way to evaluate a quarterback, in my opinion, but it's still a flawed way to do it. There is no flawless way to evaluate a quarterback, and so if that's how I feel, well, why shouldn't you use quarterback wins or quarterback rings as an argument? Personally, I don't like to use it as an argument. I almost never use it as an argument when I'm evaluating who I think is better, because I think there's better ways to evaluate a quarterback. However, let's talk about it in a different context, because I kind of try to view this as like analytically inclined, data-driven stuff. What's the correct way to do it? But what's the fun way to talk about quarterbacks? Like, listen, Matt Stafford going on a run and winning a Super Bowl was very impressive that he was able to do. Should that matter more? Like, let's say that, for example, after they took the lead, if Joe Burrow drove down the field, scored a touchdown with no time left, and the Bengals won the Super Bowl, we should still view that run the exact same way, right? Stafford has done no difference in that situation. He did the exact same thing both times. But isn't it kind of more fun that because he has the Super Bowl ring, we now view him higher in our rankings, and we now, it matters more, and we kind of, we'll talk about him as a fringe Hall of Famer now because of that, the fact that he has a Super Bowl ring? Like, that's not the correct way to view it, logically, but it's certainly a fun way to do it. When I'm watching the Super Bowl and I'm watching Patrick Mahomes versus Tom Brady, the, left brain side of me, I believe I'm getting that right, the analytically sided brain of me will sit here and say, okay, at the end of the day, it's one game. What does one game matter? Sure, it's a very big game, but in the grand scheme of things, it's just one game. It shouldn't make that big of a difference into the GOAT argument. But going into that Super Bowl, part of why it was so fun heading into that Super Bowl and why that hype was so real heading into that Super Bowl was because it's the GOAT argument of Brady versus Mahomes. And had Mahomes won that, and Brady has 6 and now Mahomes has 3, well, now it's a much more close battle. Should that matter so much more than like an entire season of games? Should one game matter that much more? Probably not. Is it more exciting though? Absolutely. So should the rings argument be used when evaluating quarterbacks? No, it shouldn't. But I hope it continues to get used that way because it's a lot of fun. That's how I view it. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.